before getting the ball rolling with this podcast, I'd just like to take a moment to dedicate this to my dad, Joey Carlyle, who passed away yesterday, aged 57. The last 24 hours have been pretty surreal, and I want to express gratitude on the behalf of my family and my siblings for all the messages that I've received. There's just simply too many for me to get through. If you've gone to any of the Everton games over the last 45 years, home and away, you'll most likely know my dad. A few people have referred to him as an Everton legend, which has made us all laugh. He's followed Everton up and down the country and all across Europe, from Wembley to Rotterdam. And of course, he's one of the reasons why I'm pursuing a career in sports broadcasting. And it makes me happy knowing that he left us while Everton were top of the league. I've just got to say, I haven't really slept, so I'm sorry if I don't come across as my usual self for this podcast, but it's one of those things, and I know he'd want me to do this. So, Dad, thank you for everything that you did. The three of us love you dearly, and I hope, if there's a heaven, that you're looking down on us. Now, to get on with things and introduce my guest, I am very, very pleased to be joined by one of the most established and reputable journalists in European and, dare I say it, world football. He's the author of 4 books and senior writer at ESPN, Gabriele Marcotti. Gab, thanks for taking the time to speak to me today. I really appreciate it. How are you?
I'm all right. Thanks for having me on. And, somebody who also lost her dad not that long ago, obviously thoughts and prayers go to you and your loved ones. And, I love the way you talked about it when you talked about his love for Everton and, leaving you with Everton top of the table. And, I like to imagine he's looking down and maybe having a laugh about this.
Yeah, I'd love to. And, as I mentioned, my dad is one of the main reasons why I'm committed to pursuing a career in this crazy industry that they call football. My dad was a very spontaneous man, and he liked to surprise me at times. Like, once he took me to the Emirates, I think in around 2006, to watch Brazil against Argentina, which as a kid just absolutely blew my mind. And another time, I think on a weekend, he said he'd booked tickets for me and my cousins to go to a Europa League tie in Wolfsburg to watch Everton play Wolfsburg. And to this day, it's one of my favourite memories and one of the favourite games of football that I've watched. There was one game, however, that I'm still cross that he didn't take me to, that being this game. The 2006 World Cup final, of course, known for being Zinedine Zidane's curtain call and Italy's triumph on penalties. And Gab, as a gentleman born in Milan, I just wanted to start by asking, what are your memories of that day?
So I was there. I would have thought you would have put a little more Everton into introducing that moment, because, of course, the person who gave away the penalty which sent Italy, which led to France's goal, and who to this day insists that it was outside the box, and same person who scored Italy's equalizer, same person who helped get Zinedine Zidane, or who was headbutted by Zinedine Zidane, of course, is a former Everton player, one Marco Materazzi, of course. I was there. It's unforgettable. When it comes to football, being an Italy fan is kind of like really the only fandom I sort of have left. In club football, I'm more a fan of individuals. For me, the really, really big deal was beating Germany in the semifinal, because it's Germany, because it was in Germany, because of the way they did it. The final felt somewhat surreal, but still incredibly, incredibly special. And um, yeah, it's. I know it sounds incredibly corny, but when you witness a moment like that, I think regardless of whether you're at home or on television, there is a feeling of there's a feeling of belonging, a feeling of being part of a greater whole. You kind of look at the world differently, at least for a short while. So, yeah, it is pretty special. And because I'm old, I also remember, even though I was a very, very young kid, I also remember the win in '82, and this one was just as sweet.
Yeah, that's great to hear, and again, I think that's brilliant that both you and my dad were there. Now, um, I wanted to ask, obviously, in terms of your life growing up, you've experienced so many different cultures and so many different cities. If I remember correctly, you were born a stone throw away from the San Siro, which is
Yeah.
a stadium of which, one day I really do dream of visiting. Places like Chicago, Warsaw, Frankfurt, New York, Tokyo, and of course, London. Um, One of the things I wanted to ask is, what was the most valuable thing that you had learned during your time in each of these cities, and how, if at all, did it fuel your passion for sport?
I think in terms of if you're talking about in terms of just moving around, and I think anybody who's moved around can attest to this, even if they just simply moved around the same city or metropolitan area, is you become much more adaptable, and you become much more in tune to the things that sort of different people have in common than to the differences. You kind of have to to adapt, and I think you tend to generally see the positives, and maybe you're a little more empathetic um, towards other people. When it comes to football, I think where I really kicked into gear as a football fan, weirdly, was actually probably when I lived in Japan. And again, this is pre-internet days, pre-J League. This was old school newspapers, airmailed. The Monday paper with the weekend results arriving on a Thursday. My dad would bring it home from work. I'm just really devouring every single scrap of anything that you could find, because it really was very, 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 very far away. And it's different now in Japan, but back then, Japan as a country was pretty much a football free zone. And obviously that all changed when I moved to London to finish my secondary school a few years later.
Of course. What was the experience like moving to London? Because obviously it's a metropolitan area for football clubs. There's so many different football clubs at different levels within the area.
Um, it was, I mean, I think football wise, again, like, oh, am I dating myself? Um, when I lived here, I was still in school. This was before the Sky era. So it was actually, you know, when I got here, I thought, oh, great. These guys invented the game. I'll get to watch a lot of football. I had no real, again, if you remember, I lived in Japan before coming here. So, and while I read as much as I could, I didn't really get to see, or I saw very little of 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 English football before that. Also because there'd been the European ban as well.
Of course.
Um, so you kind of get dropped into it, and all of a sudden, there's just like a tube right away, and you can go to watch Arsenal, you can go to watch QPR, you can go to watch Chelsea, which Fulham, who I think we're in the old fourth division back then. And you had so many opportunities kind of on your doorstep. That said, it was obviously a much different experience than going to matches today. It was the terracing. There was still a very, very tangible air of menace at a lot of games. I even went to the Den once,
Wow.
the old Den. Yeah, kind of, you're 16, you think, oh boy, aren't I hard? I'm traveling all the way to New Cross, which felt like an odyssey back then. And yeah, it's a bit of an eye opener, shall we say. But really, I left London in 1991 to go to university in the US, and that was a year before the Premier League was formed. And then I came back after graduate school 5 or 6 years later, and the transformation was just enormous. All of a sudden you had Bosman, so you had this massive foreign influx. Sky was growing, everything became more commercial. All the grounds, one by one, had been redeveloped, or were in the process of being redeveloped. In fact, it's funny actually. I remember going to Goodison, I want to say in like 98, and I didn't go as a journalist. I went with a friend who was an Everton fan, and I thought, oh wow, again, this is this is just a few years ago, like oh wow, this looks like what the grounds looked like, in the 80s, and and so that kind of stuck with me. And then obviously I've been here since, and I've kind of witnessed the transformation and what the game's become.
Yeah, that is something that I do want to touch on with you, because I'd just like to say I first met you at the Football Writers Festival in Manchester. I think it was in 2018, the summer of 18. I was covering it for my university. I saw yourself, Philip O'Clair, Sid Lowe, and Rafa Honigstein. And as someone that's grown up and studied, only ever wanting to work within football, I was like a kid on Christmas, like sitting there and listening to gentlemen such as yourselves articulate and discuss football right in front of me. I mean, I think the fact that I've had a few pints had helped,
Right.
but I don't think that impacted the standard of my work. I still think I submitted to a decent standard. And you touched on some of the changes there. Obviously, you talked about Japan pre-internet, England pre-Sky. Especially being from this part of the world on Merseyside, you look at what the most read paper is in the country, and it's very hard not to be skeptical towards journalism in the present day. It seems a completely different animal to what it was previously. It seems to be predicated on clickbait and sensationalism. And although I would say I'm much better at writing, I stick to things like this because I feel like long form discussion, there's less room for clickbait. You're not condensed to a 6-second soundbite or whatnot. You've got the opportunity to be more clear and concise with the points that you want to make. So I wanted to ask, obviously you've been there and seen the evolution and the change of not only football but journalism and sports journalism over that time. What has been some of the biggest changes that you've seen?
I think so. Obviously, the decline in actual newsstand sales is, you can't escape that. And what you described right there with, clickbait and traffic and the advertising supported model, that has been one of the biggest changes, if not the biggest change. I remember, and I say this as somebody who, I read The Guardian, and I had a lot of time for them, but at some point in, around the turn of the millennium, maybe shortly thereafter, when the internet came along and newspapers were sort of trying to figure out, how are we going to deal with this? Are we going to, charge subscribers like we would when we do home deliveries? The editor of The Guardian very famously came out and he had this line, information wants to be free. And he just decided to put all their content online for free. And it seemed like this quantum democratizing leap. Now everybody could have the information, everybody could read it, everybody could be better citizens. And unfortunately, the guy was dead wrong, and he nearly killed the newspaper industry. Certainly dealt a lot of heavy blows, because what you find is good journalism, and I'm talking, beyond sport as well, right? Journalism that actually matters, that whether it's business journalism, political journalism, stuff that impacts people's lives and that is important to democracy, that costs money, that costs resources. And if you're giving away your product for free, the only way you're going to get money is via advertising. And there's two problems with advertising. There's two problems with this model, which was Alan Rusbridger was his name, which he didn't foresee. One is a fundamental democratic problem with making it about advertising, is that you now are suddenly accountable to your advertisers. And as we're seeing more and more companies merge, these huge conglomerates, these huge multinationals, they're the ones now who exert the influence over you, because they're the ones who pay your bill if you have a purely advertising model. The other problem, which he didn't figure out, is, I don't know about you, but I think the last time I clicked on a banner ad was maybe 10 years ago. The fact that people would be desensitized to it. People who grow up as digital natives, they're not going to treat advertisements on a website the way that people might have treated advertisements in a newspaper or a magazine back in the day. And so, because you can also track exactly, via a banner, there's a code and stuff, advertisers are like, well, wait a minute, why am I paying these guys so much money if nobody freaking clicks on my ad? And that dealt a very serious blow to the injury. And that's why, personally, I'm a fan of paywalls. I'm a fan of paywall models. I think, the best guarantee that a newspaper is going to be fair and accurate and answer to its readers are the readers themselves. And if you have 100,000 like-minded readers who are willing to say, you know what, I'm going to give £5 a month, £10 a month, £15 a month, whatever it is, to support my paper, whether it's my local paper, my national paper, whatever, I will have some say. I'll be able to exert some influence. I will be able to give them the resources, and they will depend on me, the reader. Whereas now, with many papers, they're basically in hock to advertisers. And that in turn means, like you said, clickbaits, lists, you'll never believe what these child celebrities look like today, and all that crap. And you're right, that has definitely changed the conversation.
Yeah, you make some excellent points there in relation to journalism being behind the paywall, and I think you've changed my opinion there and justified, that produces a quality standard of journalism. Again, you touched on this sort of shift in business model, and to talk about something that's very topical at the moment, and I know that you've been doing some work on it today. What the hell is the European Super League? Like, we just had, what was it called? Project Big Picture turned down. And, is that all football is now, a money-making exercise?
Yeah, I think to a lot of owners, that's what it is. And I don't mean a money-making exercise in the sense that they're necessarily greedy as we understand it, because the reality is, look, many of these guys could make a lot more money in different industries, right? Roman Abramovich, the people who own Manchester City, even Malcolm Glazer, we could make more money doing something else. the people across town from you at Liverpool definitely could be making more money doing something else. But I think what has changed is that if in the past people back football clubs out of personal ambition, out of a desire to have their ego stroked, out of desire to have more influence, it's like people who bought shares in race horses, or people who bought art collections. I think now financial fair play has done. It's one of the side effects of financial fair play, together with globalization, is that this is now an investable industry, right? You can make money off this industry if you're smart, or at least not lose money, and you can see your asset appreciate in value, and you have people coming in, and this is kind of their raison d'etre. If I were to ask you, there's 20 clubs in the Premier League. Do you know how many of them have foreign owners?
I should, because I've done my dissertation on it. I'm gonna say, is it?
Some clubs got promoted and relegated.
It's 14, 16?
It's
14.
It's 14.
Okay.
And plus, then you have Joe Louis, who people seem to forget because they think Daniel Levy owns Spurs, but no, it's this man named Joe Louis. And by the way, the next time people go and rail about billionaires who are unfair and whatever, Joe Louis was born in this country. He was educated in this country. He got the benefits of a state education and a state system in this country. And then he decides to move to the Caribbean as a tax exile. So he doesn't have to pay too many taxes to this country, which educated him and nurtured him and gave him an opportunity. So I just had to get that off my chest, because I don't know why nobody ever gives him stick. People give the Glazer stick, whatever, and I'm happy for that. That's fair enough. But nobody ever has a go at this man. It's like he's totally the forgotten man in football. But look, so these people are involved in it. And I think one of the big issues with the football industry, it's not just greed. It's that the way the industry is set up, every penny that comes in generally goes out again. It either gets reinvested in the team, or if you're Manchester United, it gets taken in dividends by the Glazers. So when you have a stop to revenues, like we've had with a global pandemic, all of a sudden you're like, how am I going to make payroll? How's this going to work? There's no other industry, or very few other industries, where all of a sudden, your revenue goes down to zero overnight. And obviously it didn't quite go down to zero, but it went way down with a TV rebate and whatever. And for a lot of football league clubs and lower division clubs, as you've seen, it pretty much did go down to zero, because they make a pittance from television, and their entire revenue base is the gate, and people drinking at the club bar. And that is a massive, massive blow. And so you've had two things happening. You've had clubs saying, all right, I may be asset rich, but right now I'm really cash poor. So I need to borrow money to tide me over or whatever else. And you've also had, I think, a lot of private equity players, people who, these massive behemoths who handle enormous amounts of money, and they're looking around, they're like, well, where should we invest our clients' money? Well, it's not going to be the airline industry. It's not going to be the hospitality industry. There's a global downturn. Oh, well, football's pretty recession proof. People still talk about it. Why don't we go there? Especially since right now, maybe it's fairly cheap to do so, because a lot of football clubs are hurting. And I think that is the genesis of this European Super League idea. The idea that, and I do have a piece going up which talks about this a little bit, the idea that, all right, can we cut these other guys loose, and can we make some more money, give us some more stability? And remember, like I said before, a lot of these owners culturally, I'm not saying they're bad people or bad owners, but at least from the ones who come from the US, for them, a closed league, no promotion, relegation, salary cap, that's what it's all about, right? That they know that model works, and they say, well, why shouldn't it work over here?
Yeah. And would that increased revenue, again, similar to what happened in 92, be a byproduct of broadcasting?
See, that's a really good question, because I think in some ways the landscape obviously has changed, right? We saw the Premier League TV deal, the domestic deal anyway, that actually decreased
Yeah.
in this right cycle compared to the previous one, I think by about 7%. It'll likely decrease further. It's not like Sky and BT Sport have been minting it with their money. There is a sense that the market's already saturated. The people who aren't buying, Sky subscriptions or BT Sport subscriptions in England, they're not buying them because they can't afford it. It's not like they're not buying them because they don't like football and they get their football in other ways. People have been predicting that the global market for television rights is going to decline for a long time, and it hasn't, at least not for what you consider premium content. But I think right now, I kind of feel it does. So you may ask, well, then why are they doing this? And I think the answer is they're doing it because they don't really want to share. As you probably know, in the Premier League, the biggest earning club from TV rights gets about 1.55 to 1.6 times as much as the lowest earning club. Well, that club, I think I think it might have been Man City last year or Liverpool, because it's based on different factors, as you know. They could look at it and say, well, hang on a second. Why am I just getting, 50% more than Norwich when I spend 30 times as much as Norwich on marketing the club, on promoting the club? Most people who tune in to watch me. They don't do it because they're, Daniel Farke fans. I should get more of it.
Yeah,
I've done more to promote this product. Norwich just came up. I built this product over 20 years. Why shouldn't I get more? And that's an age-old argument that sort of the bigger legacy clubs have been making for a long time.
I was going to say that they certainly can unlock those greater levels of revenue. And I mean, for me, it takes away one of the primary elements of not just football, but sport, that uncertainty of outcome. Like last night in my misery, I stuck on Dortmund versus Lazio. And what a game of football. Lazio ran out winners. And, is the Champions League not enough now?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. It's, it's funny when people talk about uncertainty of outcome, right? They point to Paris Saint-Germain and Juventus and Bayern dominating their leagues. But I'll tell you what, I think I'm correct in saying something like out of the last 7 years, I think it's happened like 2 or 3 times. The same 6 teams haven't finished in the top 6 positions. One of them was last year, obviously. And what did it take? It took a Leicester fairy tale. It took Wolves, who are owned by a guy who also happens to own 20% of the world's biggest and most powerful football agency. It took all these anomalies, right, for that to happen. That's not healthy. Again, I don't have this year's figures, but I think Spurs had the 6th highest wage bill in the Premier League last year, and I believe Everton had the 7th or around there. And Spurs' wage bill was what, twice as high as Everton's?
Yeah.
I mean, this is already, this shit's already real, basically. So the question is, how do you mitigate it? What can you do? And I think for the bigger clubs, the logic is, let's just go to the next phase. If we go to the next phase, if we create a closed Super League, then we can impose salary caps, right? Why does the NFL make so much money? Because all the NFL players, right, the talent that you're paying for, all of them together cannot make more than 48% of the league's revenue, right? The other 52% goes to cover club costs, stadiums, blah, 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 travel, whatever, and is the owner's profit, right? Once you can do that, you have your proverbial license to print money. And I think, when I ask myself why, like if you're Spurs, for example, right? Why would you back a plan like this, like what we saw with Project Big Picture? Because sure, you'll make some more money, maybe you'll double your revenue, but United will make 10 times the revenue. So how's that going to help you? And I think the answer is if you start doing things like that, you get closer to the day when you can have a salary cap, and a more level playing field. And that'll benefit you. What it won't benefit is all the other clubs outside the big six, who aren't invited to join.
Mm. Yeah, that's a shame, but that's an excellent point. Yet another element of the MLS closed league structure borrowed in regards to this, potential new European Super League. And now, as I'm responsible for the media management at Grand Old Team, I feel like it's only relevant to bring up the team that are hot on the lips of a lot of people at the moment for all the wrong reasons. And I would like to thank you, Gab, for being the voice of reason in your recent chat with Julian Loren, when he imposed that Jordan Pickford should be banned for the same amount of time that Virgil van Dijk is out injured, by clearly stating that that is not in the laws of the game. Now, this is something that I was really interested to ask, because obviously you are a more representative sample of somebody in national and global media, and a general consensus among Evertonians is that when it comes to the more national and global media, it's not that Everton are necessarily overlooked, but they're not appreciated for their true value. You look, for example, when we recently beat Crystal Palace, there was a huge uproar about the handball rule because we received the penalty from a handball, which ultimately won us the game. And on the opening day of the season, when we beat Spurs away, all of a sudden, Spurs are an easy team to beat. Um, I was just wondering, from your perspective, what do you think of Everton, and of course, in particular, this season?
Um, so first of all, I wanted to just go back to what Jules said about it, about the Pickford should be out for as long as Van Dijk is out. Unfortunately for me, when they posted that clip, the first person you see in the clip is me. So there was all this reaction of people who just saw the headline, didn't watch the clip, and came after me and insulted me. So just for the avoidance of doubt, I do not believe that a player should be suspended for as long as the guy he got injured, or the guy he injured, whether intentionally or unintentionally, should be out for. I think it's a foolish idea. We were getting all these reactions like, oh, well, where were you when Heung-min Son, fouled Andre Gomes and all these other. This idea has been around for a long, long time. The reason it was a big deal is that Van Dijk is a very good player, he's a very popular player.
Yeah.
I've heard the same argument I heard the same argument 25 years ago when Goicoechea injured Diego Armando Maradona. Yeah, I'm that old. I've heard it when Ronaldo, the original Ronaldo, came back and got injured. It's something that people come up with. I think it's a foolish and unworkable idea. I don't know why a no-name, left back at Sheffield United should be reserve left back at Sheffield United should be deemed any less valuable than, from an ethical perspective, than a Van Dijk or a James or whatever else you choose to name. So just wanted to get that out there. In terms of Everton this season, and I got a little bit of stick for this from some people. I looked at it, and I try to look at things pretty analytically. And I say, all right, Premier League financial fair play or short-term cost control or whatever is a thing. It's a thing in Europe as well. Somebody who spent a lot of time reading this or working on financial fair play, and I know it's like the, instant Twitter, social media response of like, oh, financial fair play is a farce. Look, City got off, whatever. It's not a farce. Clubs, you could talk about the enforcement and mistakes that are being made, but clubs have to live by it, right? Yep. They can't just go and spend and ignore that. And the same applies to Everton. So when I looked at Everton, when Carlo, who I've had the privilege of spending time with on several occasions over the years, going back to when he was the manager of Milan. When he came in, I said, okay, well, this is interesting because he's only ever managed, or his most recent appointments were, teams that were ready to win now, right? Ready to go and win the title straight away, whether it's Real Madrid, whether it was Napoli, Paris Saint-Germain, whatever. He was clearly going for a longer term project, a project involving younger players, that money ball stuff that people like to throw around, somewhere to find value and to grow organically. Because the reality is, if you're Everton, to be able to afford, big name players of the kind that he was used to, you need to grow your revenue. And your stadium won't be generating revenue for several seasons, the huge uptick in revenue, obviously. You could increase revenue by finishing higher up the table, but that's really, really difficult to do. And even then, it doesn't really move the needle substantially. Or you can increase revenue commercially if you've got a brilliant commercial team, but every team goes and tries to do that, and you attract top sponsorship, whatever. So I thought he's there for a longer term project, and he is there for a longer term project, but he still, I think, wants and asks the club for players that can contribute straight away. Hence the thinking, obviously, with Alan, Doucouré, and James. I made the mistake of describing those signings as a bit weird, not because they're bad players, but because they're expensive players. And not, when I say expensive players, I always look at it in terms of the wages plus the amortized value of their fee. In other words, what that means is if I buy somebody for 30 million and he has a 5-year contract, he's costing me 6 million a year in amortization. So I take that, I add that to the player's wages, I look at the player's age, and I try to judge, was he likely to have resale value? I mean, it's as simple as that, right?
Yeah.
And I looked at it and I said, okay, this speaks more of Everton rolling the dice, which if I'm Ancelotti, that's what I want. I don't want to come here and, deal in kids and build very, very slowly or whatever, because I might not get the time. So that was my thinking. In terms of Everton's prospects this season, I knew James I suspected James would flourish under him, because obviously he's done really well under Ancelotti. He was very clear on that. Alan is another guy he had before. So the gamble with Alan was he had a very difficult final year at Napoli, but prior to that, he was arguably one of the top 2 or 3 midfielders in Serie A, obviously linked to Paris Saint-Germain and whatnot. So again, you had to put your faith in Carlo, that Carlo knows the guy, knows that he's going to be back to his best. And Doucouré is obviously, he's a guy I really rated at Watford, and I thought was a good signing. What you see is what you get with that. So I thought, all right, well, he's done this. Obviously, that is only going to take you so far. He's going to earn his bacon this year by making players better. The players who are already there, the younger ones, but and obviously people are going to point to Dominic Calvert-Lewin. That's one example. I think there's others. I think when Mason Holgate returns and has a spell of fitness, I hope he gets on the pitch, because I think he's a guy who Carlo does rate, and I think can do better. And I think that has to be the way forward for a club like Everton, because you can add those 3 players, but the imbalance of resources and wages is so big that you really need a freak season to be able to finish in the top 4 and make that great leap forward in terms of revenue.
Yeah. Possible this season?
You know what? Anything is possible this season. I don't even think we fully understand what a weird, screwed up season this is going to be because of the global pandemic. We have the most congested season in the history of football.
Yeah.
Again, people haven't wrapped their heads fully around what this means, especially for clubs playing in Europe. I think it's madness that they didn't stick to the 5 substitute rule. I think that just puts more wear and tear on players. I think you're going to start seeing COVID outbreaks as well. I mean, we're taping this on a Wednesday. As we're taping this, Bayern Munich don't know if Serge Gnabry can play or not today because of a COVID test. We've had COVID outbreaks in different clubs. I'm almost a little suspicious that I kind of feel like nobody in the Premier League has tested positive for COVID since David Moyes, which feels a bit weird to me. I don't know if they lost the COVID test, but I pray that that's not the case. This is going to be a season where all sorts. Oh, and there's no fans, obviously, for a big chunk of it. Hopefully, they'll be back at some point. So for that reason, when you've got all these uncertainties, all these anomalies, yeah, I would say it's more likely this year than it would be under normal circumstances. And I think what you'll find if Everton keeps winning, what Carlo really excels at is keeping everybody on an even keel and kind of absorbing, the pressure on the team, and kind of insulating them from that. So, yeah, I would say it's possible because just the nature of 2020.
Yeah, definitely. And that is something that I would like to ask about. I'm really glad that you brought up Mason Holgate there, because out of the squad of players that we've got, Mason Holgate is one of my personal favourites. I'm a sucker for a ball playing defender, or a defender that is no nonsense and seems like he got a lot of potential. Paolo Maldini is one of my favourite players of all time. And you touched on it first when talking about Italian football. That sort of the idolisation and iconography of individual players. When I was in university during my first year, I only had one poster in my room, and it was of Francesco Totti.
Right.
I think it rings true in Italian football, and as you said there, I think that also applies to Don Carlo to some extent. So I just want to ask. You've obviously said you've got experiences with interacting with him and working with him in the past. What's he like as a man?
He's very different from a lot of other managers out there. I don't think you're going to find anybody who says anything negative about him as a person. Whereas you will with almost everybody else. He is self-deprecating. He makes you feel like whenever you talk to them, it's like you're the most important thing in his world right now. And he comes across as really, really genuine. These are qualities that obviously got him a lot of in-demand jobs. As a coach, I think what some people don't realize about him is that his trajectory, obviously he was a great player for Roma and then for Milan. But he started out as a coach as an assistant to Arrigo Sacchi. And Arrigo Sacchi had extremely rigid ideas. Arrigo Sacchi was a genius, but he had extremely rigid ideas about tactics and how things should play and players following tactical instructions. And that was Ancelotti in his first few jobs as a manager. He freely admits this. I think maybe some listeners will know, if they watched Italian football in the 90s, that Ancelotti famously, when he was at Parma, he turned down a chance to sign Roberto Baggio, and he went to Gianfranco Zola and said, look, I can't play you at striker because I think it was Chiesa and Crespo he had at the time. Those guys are better than you. You got to play as a winger and track back. And when Zola wasn't very good at it, he's like, sorry, that was the only place I could put you. There's no room for you here. And so he went to Chelsea, and the rest is history. And he says, that was a mistake. Like, it was a mistake saying no to Roberto Baggio because I was like, how does he fit my 4-4-2 with the pressing triggers and whatever else and the movements off the ball? He's not that guy anymore. He can be that guy, which I think again, if you were to speak to Bayern fans, some of them didn't like him, but the fact that he can be that guy is what prompted Bayern to look to him to replace Pep. So, can you be a hybrid of that more schematic, more high pressing, high intensity thing, and what we've seen is your approach? You can also be a pragmatist. Um, I think he's somebody who's always kind of thinking ahead, and you don't always see that because he normally doesn't ask these questions. But I remember when I spent time with him a couple years ago. He's like, you know what I think one of the next big innovations in football might be. Um, he said, when we have training sessions, we spend X amount of time on conditioning, on fitness. Every player's body is different. I think we'll get to the point where every player is going to have their own personal trainer. They're going to train by themselves on their own time. And then when we come to the training session, all we're going to do is shape and tactics and all those things that, for which you need other players for. But the conditioning, 2 laps around the pitch, lads, whatever, running on the sand on the beach, whatever the hell people used to do, like that's going to go out the window. And I thought, like, man, that's really interesting. He also pointed out, I think, another huge paradox in football, which again, for clubs that are involved in Europe, especially in this very congested season, you simply don't have very many training sessions. Your training sessions are basically walkthroughs. And what that means is that you as a manager, you have very little input. Like you have a lot of input in picking a team and giving instructions pre-match and making substitutions, obviously. But beyond that, you can't really work with players. You can't really you can really teach players individually the way you might have under normal circumstances, or the way you might on a team that's not involved in European football. And he said, and I think that's a shame. Like I'm a club owner. Like I'm paying Pep or Klopp, untold millions, giving them all this power, knowing that I can't send them out there to do what they're best at, which is working on the training pitch. And I thought that was a really good point. And I think another sort of paradox of where we're kind of going in football, where players are being asked to play so many games.
Yeah, definitely. That's really interesting to hear that he is one of those sort of philosophical guys that looks forward. And just to round up the podcast now, I've been extremely grateful for your time, Gab. I mean, looking forward, what Bramley Murdoch is supposedly 2 or 3 years away. I know Carlo did say that he did want to extend his contract beyond then and be at the club for that period of time. I know you said anything is possible during this freak season, but if you were to put an estimate on how long and what it would take for Everton to, who knows, maybe want to be one of these clubs in a European Super League, how do you think that happens, and how does Carlo go about that?
I'm curious when you mentioned European Super League. I'm sorry, I apologize if I ask you a question now. And I get this a lot, obviously, with people in the other half of Merseyside, who they're all man of the people, whatever. But then you talk Super League, and of course, you can't have a Super League without Liverpool, right? Do you think Everton fans want this?
The European Super League?
No, but like, is it the kind of thing that? Because it's a genuine question, because you have a whole bunch of clubs who are kind of on the bubble in some way, right? Potentially in, potentially out. And the knee-jerk reaction, like if Joel Glazer were here, he would probably tell you, well, all these people are against it because their clubs aren't in it. I mean, I know for a fact that's what Florentino Perez would say, right?
Okay.
Would you want to be in a closed European? Would you want your club to be in a closed European Super League?
Personally, I stand against the concept, but what I would say as an uneducated 22-year-old that has only been alive for a short slither of time in football, that if you go back to the late 80s, obviously the European ban and Heysel, Everton were robbed of achieving so much of their potential during their peak times. And as I say, that took away any prospect of achieving, who knows, a European Cup, consistent European finishes, and by the time Sky's investment in the Premier League happened in 1992, although Everton were one of those big six clubs at the time that were consulted, they may have had much bigger bargaining power and be, who knows, in a similar situation to what Liverpool are in now. So, as I say, I can see both sides of the coin and where both opinions may come from. But me personally, I just don't like the concept.
I've spent a lot of time talking to different people who want to see this happen, people who act like they don't, people who only want to see this happen if they can be a part of it. What would really scare me is that if you go the whole hog, if you go, all right, 20 super clubs or whatever, dotted around Europe, closed system, NBA style, NFL style, I'll tell you what, it's going to be really, really hard to justify two teams in Manchester. Fact, plus another team 25 miles away. And not have a team in Berlin, for example, or Moscow, or Amsterdam. Because once you make it all about money and catchment area and population size, and unfortunately, in some ways, this is what football has become, right? And Liverpool are hurt in inverted commas by this as well, right? In the sense that you have to share a city, which isn't an enormous city, incidentally, it's not Paris, with another hugely successful club. You got the Irish Sea on one side and the Wirral on the other, and then you go the other way and you've got freaking United and City, right? And so you have a diffuse fan base, and so sponsors look at this and say, well, yeah, I don't want to invest in them. Let me go and build something in Berlin where I've got 7 rich Germans with BMWs I can sell my product to. Once that thinking takes over, and look, I say this, I'm from Milan. Could Milan have 2 teams? I don't know. Could Madrid have 2 teams? Again, based on history, both Inter and Milan are there. Nobody's going to argue with that. Based on potential and catchment area, can you justify any European city having more than 1 team, except maybe London at a stretch? Maybe 2? Sorry, Spurs or Chelsea, one of you two is losing out. This is what we're going to get into. These are the conversations, right? Once you make it about money, and people have to be cognizant of that. Man City have to be cognizant of that. Sheikh Mansour, they'll love you as long as you keep bringing all the money. But at some point, when they have to make decisions and they have to count heads, all right, are there more of you or are there more United guys? Okay, look, United have X many more fans. See ya. That's the thing. Sorry, but to go back to your original question, can Everton get back? I think it's a lot more difficult today, right? Because you talk about, you're free to invest in a stadium, but then you have to fill the stadium, and you have to fill the stadium without gouging the fans. One of the big things, with the Emirates here in London, is they make a ton of money off their stadium because it's a big stadium full of fans. They charge very high ticket prices, and they charge a ton of money in selling corporate boxes to people in the city because London's a big place with a lot of very rich people. Can Everton go down that route to the same degree? I was talking to somebody at a club across town from you who said one of the frustrations with the corporate boxes at Anfield is that there's no late train back to London. Because we could sell to a bunch of people there, but unless they charter a plane back or a coach, nobody wants to, they need to be back in the office or back jetting off to New York or Hong Kong the next morning, right? It's this dynamic, right? The game's become so much about money and revenue and all these things. And while I spend a lot of my life covering it, I wish we could just talk about the football side of it. On the football side, I'll tell you what, if everybody stays fit this season, and if you got a few breaks, I see no reason why Everton can't finish top 4, simply because of all the uncertainty that's out there, simply because, again, but leaving all the non-football stuff aside, you know, you have, I think you've got clubs like Chelsea have made a ton of changes. Clubs like United, you know, it's 1 week up, 1 week down. Liverpool have obviously lost arguably their most important player. Spurs, still Mourinho, you never quite know, and you know when you got a ticking time bomb. And I do think Arteta still has an enormous rebuild on his hands at Arsenal, and I think Arsenal are going on a journey similarly where we won't see the real Arsenal for a few years. So, yeah, there's a ton of things in place that suggest to me that it's possible, but you know you got to have a lot of breaks.
Yes, certainly many different variables during this transitional period in English football, and one would hope Everton can achieve success sometime soon. Now, Gab, I'd just like to say I really do appreciate your time, and I could speak to you for hours on end about some of the points that you've raised. That I thoroughly enjoyed the podcast, and I'm glad that I did it. You're more than welcome to come onto the podcast anytime you'd like. So I just want to say again, thanks for speaking to me, and thanks for the time.
No, well, thanks for having me on. Shout out to your dad, who I know is looking down, and he's no doubt proud of you. And to everybody out there, please stay safe. And to everybody out there who gave me stick for what Julian Lawrence said, I invite you all, please listen to the Gab and Jules show. Afterwards, feel free to go on Twitter and abuse him. He likes it. But, you know, I'm happy to answer for the stuff I say. I don't want to be answering for the stuff other people say.
Of course. Take care. Stay safe.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Cheers, Max. Take care. All the best.